Do you remember a genre of music called alternative rock? It mainly held sway in the 1990s. Bands like the Smashing Pumpkins, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Green Day, the Foo Fighters, and R.E.M. were just a few of the many bands that were topping the Billboard charts at that time. The term alternative rock is essentially a made-up genre for anything that was outside of mainstream rock and roll. And for most of the 1990s, alternative rock reigned supreme. That's right, there was a time when bands who thought outside the box, who actually played real instruments, were the top pop culture influencers. Needless to say, as a musician, this was my favorite time for music. Don't get me wrong, I loved the 1970s as well. I thought that was a great time for music, but to be honest, I wasn't alive for that. But whatever happened to this alternative rock genre, and does it still exist to this day? Well, that's what I want to find out tonight. This is the Overstimulation Station.
Let's start with a short history lesson. The term alternative rock began being used as a way to describe guitar-driven music that didn't sound anything like the mainstream rock music of the 1980s. So you had the guitars and the distortion, but you didn't have the makeup or raging guitar solos. Plus, all these nerdy college kids seem to prefer you over these other bands, so we'll just play nice and call you alternative. Yeah, that's basically how things went down. Indeed, many of the first popular alternative rock bands were mainly gaining airplay and popularity off college radio stations, so the term college rock was first used to describe these bands. R.E.M. is one of the first bands of this ilk that come to mind.
It's at this point that things start to get a little bit confusing and the term alternative rock really starts to show its vagueness. Although R.E.M. was initially classified as college rock, they were later interpreted as alternative rock. But one could easily make the argument that R.E.M. is indie rock. That's the problem with calling a band alternative rock, because what does it mean really, if anything at all?
In the early 90s, when bands from the Seattle scene were turned into commodities and labeled as grunge by the record companies, many of these bands were co-opted under the alternative rock umbrella as well.
At this point, it's starting to become obvious just how loose the term alternative rock really is. But it got so much worse.
As the 90s wore on, grunge became passé, and alternative rock became king, with some of the highest-selling albums being attributed to alternative rock bands such as the Smashing Pumpkins and Radiohead. Concurrently, the advent of the Lollapalooza Festival and its eclectic lineup became the zeitgeist for what many music critics considered to be the pinnacle of who and what alternative rock was.
But let's take a look at some of the top dogs of the alternative rock genre and see if we can find a common thread within. Green Day was considered an alternative rock band, but I always considered them kind of pop punk. Then you had the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They were considered alternative rock, but I kind of view them more as funk mixed with punk rock and just regular rock and roll. Then you had Pearl Jam after the whole grunge wave faded away, and later in their 90s career, they were considered alternative rock, but I view Pearl Jam as just kind of a modern rock kind of jam band, kind of like the Grateful Dead of the 90s. Then you had No Doubt. They were definitely lumped into the alternative rock genre, but if you listen to No Doubt's music, it sounds more like ska-infused rock with some reggae flair.
My point is, alternative rock doesn't mean anything. It was a marketing strategy. It was a way to take popular bands that kids liked and put them all under an umbrella so they could be marketed easier. But did these bands ever have anything in common?
Well, kind of. There was definitely a 1990s rock sound that I'm just not hearing in music anymore. Experimentation coupled with really well-written melodies would be a hallmark of the alternative rock genre, in my opinion. Take the Nirvana album Nevermind. I mean, sure, it's bombastic and in your face, but if you strip away the distorted guitars and the pounding drums, the melodies within are pop perfection.
This broad alternative rock ecosystem also allowed for incredibly off-the-wall bands like Primus to flourish. Would bands like the Smashing Pumpkins and Radiohead have achieved the same success had it not been for this pre-established alternative rock fan base? As time marches on, however, trends die out and popular music genres fade into the background. The late 90s and early 2000s brought in the next big thing for rock music with a genre known as nu metal. Bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit were the top-selling acts at this point, but it's easy to see how these bands felt more contrived and less sophisticated, which is fine for a while, but that shit got old quick. Then emo took over with the skinny jeans and the whiny sad boy lyrics, and now finally indie rock has become the new mainstream.
But did the alternative rock genre ever truly die? Well, that depends.
Let's review. Alternative rock was a marketing term that meant something to young people in the 1990s. If you were a record company and you billed your newest band as an alternative rock band, you were probably guaranteed some record sales. For the last 20 years, however, alternative rock has meant nothing. I mean, you can literally call anything alternative rock now. The term is so diluted, I don't think anybody can even wrap their head around what actually defines alternative rock in 2019. Coldplay is considered alternative rock. The Gorillaz are considered alternative rock. Imagine Dragons are considered alternative rock. None of these, quote, new alternative bands sound anything like the bands that shaped the genre in the 1990s, and I'd really just wish they'd stop using the term altogether.
So what was alternative rock anyway? Well, to me, alternative rock is a very nuanced style of music that is very broad, yet specific at the same time. The melodies have to be really well written, and a really loud distorted guitar certainly helps. I feel like alternative rock is a you-know-what-I-mean kind of genre. Like if somebody asked me, what's your favorite music genre, and I say 90s alternative rock, you know what I mean. But I guess the best way to get into alternative rock and find out what it is just listen to some of the albums. The albums behind me are great classic alternative rock albums, and I'll leave a description of some classic alternative rock albums in the description of this video. But I'd like to hear from you as well. I'd like for you to comment on what do you feel are some classic alternative rock albums. They don't have to be from the 90s. There were some good alternative rock bands in the 2000s and beyond. For instance, Arcade Fire is one of my more recent favorites. I guess it could be argued whether they're truly alternative rock or not, but I'll save that for another video. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this, you can check by clicking something around my head here. They're all in this very similar kind of mini documentary format. And until next time, have a good rest of your night.